natural world is dying. This may sound dramatic, but I think it's a perfectly realistic statement to make, and I'm not the only person who makes it. And it is dying fast. So fast that at current trends, much of it will cease to be capable of supporting complex forms of life like human beings in a matter of decades. That is why we, the representatives of the World Rainforest Movement and EcoRopa, hereby declare a state of global environmental emergency.
On September the 19th, 1989, I came with leading environmentalists from all over the world to the United Nations in New York. Our purpose was to demand an extraordinary general meeting of the United Nations to discuss our plan to save the world's rainforests. We brought in wheelbarrows 3 million signatures from 23 countries backing our demand.
All I can do now, thank you for coming to see us. We're very grateful that you should come.
We asked to see the Secretary General, but his assistant told us he was too busy. Apparently, he had more pressing concerns than the survival of our planet.
What are his priorities? And to do that, I think he should possibly come down just for 1 minute to see us. And we're willing to stay all day because we know he's a busy man. We will stay here.
This is the story of my part, a small part, in a crusade to bring an end to the destruction of our global environment. It has taken us 25 years to get this on the agenda, during which time I have asked myself almost daily, what is driving us on this suicidal path, and how can we stop it? Today I am convinced there are no magical solutions. I believe we need a new society, one that fully respects the natural world, one that also provides a more fulfilling way of life. I was born in Paris in 1928. My father ran a chain of luxury hotels, most of them in the south of France. As a child, I spent every winter with my brother Jimmy, living it up in Cannes and Monte Carlo. Today, Jimmy is a well-known business tycoon. He and I were destined to follow very different paths. Looking back, it was an unlikely upbringing for someone with my subsequent preoccupations.
40 years ago, I had the privilege to spend 3 years here at Magdalen College, Oxford. I met a lot of very, very interesting people. I had a wonderful time. But what did it really teach me? I think that the main lesson was that the picture of the world that scientific knowledge paints is wrong. Partly, at least for that reason, I spent very little time in my studies and devoted myself to something absolutely different, gambling.
Why is the picture of the world painted by conventional knowledge all wrong? As I realized much later, it is wrong because it is designed to justify the industrial system. And it is the industrial system itself which is the source of the global environmental crisis we face today. Little did I realize 40 years ago that it was these thoughts that would preoccupy me for the rest of my life. As a young man, I tried my hand at business in Paris. I was not very successful and spent most, but not all, of my evenings trying to write a book proposing an alternative way of seeing the world. Thank God no one ever published it.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
I remember the 60s as a period of technological euphoria. There was no limit to what man could achieve.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
But the incredible technology and billions of dollars that put man on the moon seemed incapable of solving the growing problems that faced humanity. In India, millions face starvation. Modern technology was creating its own problems. In Japan, these Minamata victims were poisoned by mercury from a local chemical plant. In Britain, the Torrey Canyon oil spill alerted us to the dire threat of pollution hanging over industrial society. Horrified at the brave new world we were creating, I asked myself, could nature survive it? Indeed, could man? My personal response was to retreat from the modern world to a small farming community in Cornwall. With a number of friends, I started The Ecologist magazine in 1970. This was our first edition. In those days, ecology was almost unheard of. Naively, we believed that if our political leaders were told about the destructive implications of their policies, they would change them. Two years later, we produced A Blueprint for Survival. We wanted to warn people about the grave environmental problems being created by industrial society. The blueprint put forward a plan for a less destructive, more sustainable way of life. We seemed to hit a nerve. It sold 500,000 copies in 16 languages.
First, we must recognize that economic growth in the developing
Concern with environmental destruction was now growing throughout the world. So much so that the United Nations organized their first international conference on the human environment.
So our task, I think, is not to create an idyllic environment for poor men. Our task is to create a decent environment for all men.
The conference was seen by many as heralding the dawn of a new era. Disillusioned young people with eyes full of hope thronged there by the thousands. We were skeptical about the promises made by governments, and 20 years later, how empty their words seem. In Britain, the Blueprint for Survival helped give birth to the Green Party, or the People Party, as it was first called. I stood unsuccessfully for Parliament in 1974. Frustrated by my own society's blindness, I was drawn to India and the teachings of Mahatma Gandhi. Looking for a new social model, an alternative to industrial society, I was attracted by Gandhi's conviction that the simple way of life is best. Mahatma Gandhi opposed industrialization. His vision was of an India of largely self-governing and self-sufficient villages. For him, the charkha, or the spinning wheel, was a symbol of this way of life. The vision of community life in self-sufficient villages inspired me in my search for an ideal society. But in spite of Gandhi, I saw that India was bent on rapid industrialization. Not even agriculture was to be spared. Food shortages were attributed to backward farming practices. The solution was to introduce the high-yielding varieties of wheat and rice recently developed by Western scientists. It seemed that modern technology would triumph yet again.
We must proclaim a bold objective, that within a decade, no child will go to bed hungry, that no family will fear for its next day's bread, and that no human being's future and capacities will be stunted by malnutrition.
The technology that offered an end to malnutrition was christened the Green Revolution. The scientist responsible for the new high-yielding wheat was Professor Norman Borlaug. For this, he received the Nobel Peace Prize.
In 1974, when Mr. Kissinger at the World Food Conference in Rome made the statement that by 1990, no children in the world will go to bed hungry, I was shocked, I was horrified, because I knew that the magnitude of the problem was such that this could never be achieved. That was a political answer. But I did say that we had 3 to 4 decades to try to bring better balance into population growth and our ability to provide the basic needs for a decent standard of living.
But is the Green Revolution really the answer? Today we know that the high-yielding varieties, which require ever-increasing amounts of expensive fertilizer, pesticide and water, are sucking the fertility from the soil. With its emphasis on maximizing production, the Green Revolution has encouraged farmers to sacrifice their land for a quick profit. The results have been devastating. Millions of small farmers, forced into debt and unable to farm their degraded land, have migrated to the cities. Most end up here in the slums, with little chance of ever getting out. Everywhere, you can see for yourself, there's dirt, stagnant water, cesspools, choked up drains. Significantly enough, next to it is a garbage dump. These people don't reside here out of choice. Most are here because of so-called development. Some 20 million have been forced into slums by large dams that have flooded their lands. Others are here because logging and deforestation have caused their springs and wells to dry up. For others still, it's a green revolution. These people are development refugees. It is but a question of decades before the bulk of humanity inhabits slums such as this, a truly terrifying prospect. The slum, I think, can be regarded as the ultimate symbol of the industrializing world. It is the human garbage dump. In the late 70s, I came to the United States, the citadel of modern industrial society and the richest nation in the world. Could this really be the model for all other countries to emulate? Before me was New York, with its great material wealth and architectural wonders, the most impressive creation of scientific, technological, and economic progress. But I asked myself, was this real wealth? Just a few miles from New York City on Staten Island is Fresh Kills Landfill, the world's largest garbage dump, spread over 5 square miles. Most of New York's domestic waste ends up here, some 22,000 tons a day. The stench is unforgettable. Vast amounts of rotting food and plastic waste, aluminium cans, TVs, refrigerators, all waiting to be buried and forgotten. Just as we dispose of all this, so do we also consign our used cars to the scrap heap, cars which modern man can no longer live without. In the United States alone, 7 million cars are junked every year. In our new age of ever-increasing consumption, nothing is built to last. This is the material wealth by which our industrial society measures success and happiness. But what we don't see is the great natural wealth brutally sacrificed to produce it. Ten years ago, the Global 2000 report, commissioned by former President Carter, raised the specter of increasing environmental destruction. A leading critic of the report was Professor Julian Simon, co-author of The Resourceful Earth. Simon's book claims that Global 2000 got it completely wrong.
We've been getting richer rather than poorer by every single measure. Resources have been becoming more available rather than less available. That is, the prices of every single natural resource have been getting cheaper rather than more expensive since the Global 2000 report, as well as all throughout history, totally contradicting these very reasonable sounding theories. Even our environment has been getting cleaner. Our air and our water in the United States and in Great Britain have been getting cleaner rather than dirtier for decades. Just the opposite of the predictions that were made by Global 2000.
Well, it seems very much from reading your books that you believe that science and technology can solve all our world's problems and create a better Earth. Is that so, Julian?
The issue isn't whether I think that science and technology can solve our problems, but rather the evidence of all history is that science and technology has been giving us a progressively better life rather than a progressively poor life in all kinds of material ways, whether or not the theories seem to suggest that. That is, science and technology have been giving us longer life, better health, richer lives, more resources, a cleaner environment, all the material goods of life. And there's no reason why they should not continue to do that forever. And there's a mechanism that explains this. And the mechanism runs like this. More people or higher income produce problems, just the way you say they do. But then something happens. People respond to those problems as an opportunity for profit or for fame or for whatever. And they look for solutions to these problems. Some people fail. A few succeed in finding solutions to these problems. And the results of their solutions, and this is the amazing part, leave us better off than if the problems had never arisen in the first place.
I cannot believe that science and technology really leave us better off. The so-called solutions that have given rise to our modern world also cause atmospheric pollution and global warming. Technology cannot solve these critical problems. Industrial society, by its very nature, generates pollution. It is industrial society itself which must be phased out to make way for a simpler, less destructive way of life. By the end of my journey to the United States, I realized that the ultimate question was, were we born into paradise on Earth, or are we creating paradise with our science and technology? Is man's design really superior to God's? In this meaningless world of pinball alleys, even pleasure is dispensed by machines. Pleasure derived from tension and violence. In my search for a more fulfilling society, one in which nature and people are valued, I went in 1979 to Sri Lanka. I found a country not too affected by economic growth. Here was a high quality of life. Today, despite the civil war, many village communities are still intact. A rich spiritual and ceremonial life makes this possible. These young people are helping a neighbor thresh his rice. No money changes hands, but the neighbor and his family can in turn be counted upon when their help is needed. The work is joyful and convivial. This is social wealth. The tractor is no substitute for the bullock, which fertilizes the field as it plows. But expensive and often destructive machines are already taking over from these age-old methods. What particularly impressed me were the lush forest gardens which cover much of the country. Half an acre will feed an entire family. This is ecological wealth. A source of inspiration to me on my first visit to Sri Lanka was a small farmer called Teddy Goldsmith. Today, he leads a campaign to keep alive the ancient traditions in a rapidly modernizing world.
පල රස දන්නෝ බිම හඳුනන්නෝ මේ පද නොදන්නෝ කුමට වූපන්නෝ. Who knows the taste of milk knows mother. Who knows the taste of rice knows father. Who knows the taste of fruits knows earth. Anybody who don't know these three, for what he was born?
In the last 10 years, since I've seen you, have things got better or worse? Is the life of the farmer easier or more difficult?
During the time that you met me, I was doing the traditional agriculture. And after introducing the new way, modern methods, what happened? We had to leave the village. I had to leave the village because of the modern agriculture. People has to spend much more money for this modern agriculture, for importing fertilizer and pesticides, everything. And also our habit has already vanished now. The problem, the people as myself says, because the Western methods, people who taught us from the West, the new way of living is a disaster.
Western experts would dismiss this traditional rice ceremony as irrelevant. But the villagers believe the ceremony ensures a plentiful harvest, and it does. By strengthening the sense of community, the ceremony encourages essential cooperation between the farmers. I asked Tennakoon how many varieties of rice are grown today.
We can find nearly 20 to 30 varieties here in Sri Lanka now.
How many were there?
In the past, more than 300 varieties.
What effect have all these changes had on the community?
We had 3 wells. These children is the first. Second is the forest. Third is the animal. Children, we have to teach them the tradition. Otherwise, we can't, no use of having children. They must learn their tradition and follow the forefathers and protect the forest and protect the animals live with them. We used to get an ant from the house when we were small children. We were playing, take it into the farm, and we were playing. Padito tot nata piya maat nata nam padito. Padito tot nata piya maat nata nam padito. Please dance with me. And you also
talking to
dance.
the ant. You're talking to the ant.
Yeah, talking to the ant. We played with them. We had the relationship with them.
It's wonderful.
Now we are breaking that.
But the social and ecological wealth that Tennikoon is trying to preserve has no value in the light of modern economics. Sri Lanka, officially classed as one of the world's poorest countries, is rapidly being led along the path of economic development. This is recently completed Victoria Dam, financed by Britain's aid agency, the ODA. It's the largest of 4 dams on the Mahaweli, Sri Lanka's main river. And as you can see, it's very impressive indeed. You might even regard it as a monument to modern engineering skill and ingenuity. But it has its costs. 10 years ago, when I came here with a close colleague of mine, there was no dam and no reservoir. Instead, there was a beautiful and very, very fertile valley with small towns, villages, gardens, woods, plantations, and ancient Buddhist temples along the river bank. All that had to go. It had to be drowned to make way for the reservoir. And the people who lived here, and I think there were about 30,000 of them, had to be resettled elsewhere. In this case, admittedly, with considerable care and sensitivity by the Sri Lankan government. What is the justification for this? The answer is to provide electricity for the country's industries and cities. But it can only do this for a short time, perhaps 40 or 50 years. And one reason is that rivers like the Mahaweli in the tropics carry a heavy burden of silt, which is basically soil that's come down from the slopes behind, you see, caused by deforestation and erosion. And this silt builds up behind the dam till eventually the reservoir is full up and the dam has to be abandoned. It is these thoughts that led my colleague and myself to undertake a detailed study of the social and environmental effects of large dams. And the more we learnt about this issue, the less it appeared worthwhile to destroy so much real and natural wealth just in order to obtain a few decades of electricity. After which, all that is left is an abandoned concrete hulk, a monument to our misguided priorities, a monument set in a muddy wasteland where once a fertile soil nourished happy and sustainable communities. I came back from Sri Lanka determined to fight large development projects like dams. The only way was to challenge the international aid agencies that fund them. In 1985, we brought out a special edition of The Ecologist on the destructive development promoted by the World Bank. Today, the World Bank claims to have gone green, but has it?
The actual lending for environmental components, environmental projects, is on a rapid upswing. So I think what is happening in the bank is that the change of policy has led to a change in the composition and quality of the lending program. Now that doesn't mean to say that, and you would be the first to point out, that big projects don't come to a grinding halt and suddenly get dropped off. But they do change qualitatively as these changes take place in the bank. But I think the best answer to give you is that the analogy of the supertanker, that when the captain says that a supertanker will change direction and gives the order, there is a delay of some considerable space of time while that maneuver is completed and the tanker is actually on the new course. And I would typify the bank at this point as being beyond the halfway point of that turn.
I'm personally not at all convinced that it's possible to have economic development without environmental and social destruction. What's your answer to that?
Well, I respect your viewpoint because I can see at a certain level, I look at development in the industrial countries and I think there is absolutely no way one could replicate that in developing countries and throughout the world and look to a future that is sustainable. But I'm telling you that the signals in the bank are that there are a number of third world countries who have accepted the fundamental proposition that their development will not succeed unless they move towards a sustainable pattern. And as you know, sustainability means that we move, and it'll take time, and it's extremely difficult, to different patterns of resource management, particularly in respect of soil and water in the third world.
I've heard the bank's rhetoric before, but the bank is still spending $20 billion a year on the same expensive and destructive projects. No amount of money spent on environmental measures can make these projects any less destructive. For me, the only answer is to drastically reduce the bank's budget. Better still, close the bank down.